Hi, everyone, and welcome to MedEdge. I'm Marcus Grimm. Quick reminder, MedEdge is brought to you by Medtrics, the software platform built by a team of healthcare professionals and technology experts on a mission to simplify and centralize clinical education. Medtrics, practice medicine, not software. You can learn more at metricslab.com or from my co-host. He's here today, Santosh Cherian, who's the CEO of Medtrics. You know, if we think about our lives, we all recognize milestones, right? We change jobs, we change homes, we change banks. But sometimes in our haste to get from point A to point B, we frequently forget that journey from one position to another in life is ripe for challenge. The challenge, of course, of transformation. In thermodynamics, they have a term for this. They talk about entropy. In any energy transfer, some energy becomes unusable and increases the entropy of the system. It represents a kind of loss in terms of usable energy. Well, today's guest is going to be speaking to us about a specific type of energy loss, one that happens in that critical transition from UME to GME. Gretchen Holmes is an ACGME Designated Institutional Official, the DIO and Director of Clinical Research at a medical institution in the Southeast. In her role, Dr. Holmes oversees all medical education, including graduate and undergraduate medical education, continuing medical education, and clinical research. Previously, Dr. Holmes served as the GME Director of Research for multiple hospital systems and as the DIO Director of GME for Orange Park Medical Center in Orange Park, Florida. As DIO, she has started over 10 residency programs, achieved full accreditation for existing programs, and has started multiple fellowships. Dr. Holmes is an experienced researcher, having published in top journals, including Health Communication, Psycho-Oncology, and Injury Epidemiology. Her published research includes work in rapport, provider-patient communications, health literacy, decision-making, and rural cancer health disparities. She regularly taught behavior change therapy at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, has served as a national-level patient advocate for the National Cancer Institute since 2002, and serves on the editorial board for the Journal of Patient Experience. Finally, she was named one of the top 100 successful women to know in 2022 by Gulf Coast Magazine. A 3-time cancer survivor, Dr. Holmes is a motivational and keynote speaker and is the host of the podcast, The Work In Between, which I love because we're going to be talking today about what's in between milestones. That podcast focuses on the daily behaviors and actions necessary to achieve our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health goals. She holds a PhD from the University of Kentucky. That's one of those intros that wears me out. Dr. Holmes, welcome to MedEdge. We're thrilled to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm exhausted just listening to that. So thank you for that beautiful introduction.
So many things you have done. Amazing.
Thank you.
It really is. Now it's interesting to me. You've been involved in healthcare education. So your LinkedIn takes us all the way back to 2005 in healthcare education. But even prior to that, you worked for the NCI Cancer Information Service. So clearly, going back for several years, even though you're not a doctor, you're not a nurse, for you, there's something about healthcare. Just tell us about your background and how you found yourself in healthcare.
I'm pretty sure that it came from the fact that growing up, my older brother had hemophilia. And I spent an insane amount of time in the hospital with my family. And so I got really comfortable in the healthcare area. And as I got older, I toyed with becoming a physician. And then I realized I'm really bad at math and science. So that's probably not a good idea. But I really was interested in the communication aspect in healthcare. And when I was diagnosed with cancer, there were so many missteps, so many problems, even though I'm fine, that it really cemented my interest in healthcare. And I kind of backdoored my way into graduate medical education through a position where I was a research director. And the residency program was right next to my office. And I heard him talking one day and I offered to help. And then I became hooked. And I've been in graduate medical education ever since.
That is fascinating. And I love that. It's great when you have those light bulb moments. You were hooked. Do you recall what it was that hooked you?
So, for example, when I was diagnosed with cancer the first time, I was told over the phone. And I thought, well, there should be a better way than telling somebody over the phone. By the way, you have cancer. My nurse is going to call you. Come on in the next day. And I do remember another time when I was sitting there in the doctor's office, and I was really upset because I wasn't sure what I should do, what kind of treatments, even though it was very clear what I should do. And I was crying, which was unusual. And he looked at me and said, "I can't help you." And he turned around and walked out of the room. And I thought, boy, do we have work to do. And that's really when it cemented everything. And that's how I ended up at the University of Kentucky studying health communication and also doing a lot of work with the medical school in medical behavioral science.
Do you think you're 3-time cancer survivor? That's just wow. We could spend hours on that, but I'm curious. It seems like that experience has really shaped and molded sort of your career path. Would you see yourself in healthcare if that hadn't occurred to you? If that hadn't happened to you?
I think so. Just because of growing up around my brother and being so comfortable in that world. But, one of the things that having cancer 3 times has done for me is it has made me look at healthcare in a very different way, because I realized how much you have to self-advocate, how you can't just be passive as you navigate the healthcare system. And so that's where I've really been focusing. A lot of my talks is on advocacy, self-advocacy, and a lot of behavior change talks as well. But that really has been my focus, because so many people are so intimidated when they get involved in the healthcare system when you enter it, because you don't typically go see your doctor unless something's going wrong. I mean, sometimes you go for a health visit that's, just a wellness visit. But quite often you're in a hospital because something is very stressful that's going on. Even if you're having a baby, it's still very stressful. Very happy, but it's stressful. And so people are intimidated. They don't know what questions to ask. They don't want to look stupid. People use terms that nobody understands. And so coming at it from both sides, as a patient, as an administrator, we got to bring these sides together, because we're not reaching the goals that we set out to reach.
The communication challenges, both from communicating with the patients and communicating how to navigate the hospital. It's a very interesting topic. One thing that as a radiologist, especially an emergency radiologist, my interactions are directly with the doctors, not necessarily with the patients. But having gone through medical school and an intern year, I definitely agree with what you mentioned earlier. When your specific challenge of like the doctor, how they deliver something on the phone, and even what they said to you about, "I can't help you," that empathetic communication is something that is not always happening. Sometimes we're trained to diagnose and solve the problem, but not necessarily how do you deliver that. I mean, some physicians will model that behavior. My wife is a psychologist, so and we have a kid now, so we're always about modeling behaviors. That's why that term just. But sometimes if you're a good educator, you will model that behavior, and someone else will pick it up and say, "Oh, that's how that person did it, and I'll do it." But it's not. I don't always, at least in my experience, I wasn't intentionally taught this is how you should handle this type of scenario. And it's more of, you just kind of observe it and you pick it up, and maybe you get a presentation on it, how you should be empathetic. But I think there could be more work done in how that's handled. So kind of expanding on that, we'd love to see, like, how has that experience kind of shaped how you are providing feedback to the residents in your institutions?
So I have always had the opportunity, especially as a GME leader, to be able to interact with the residents. And I've often given didactics. And I told my story as a cancer survivor. I talked to them about behavior change. I talked to them about how to deliver bad news. I talked to them about being patient-centered from a patient perspective. I mean, I can bring the research in, and I do, but I think the power comes from the patient narrative. And medical school is jam-packed with tons of training and education. You have a very finite amount of time to learn a ton of stuff. And it's very difficult to take something away and replace it with something like communication, right? So that you tend to learn about communication by the modeling behavior that you're talking about, because it's too difficult to take anything away. But because I have overseen GME now for quite some time, I'm able to directly, and I consider it ground zero, talk with the residents about what the challenges are that I've seen and how they can make some subtle changes to make sure that they are being patient-centered. I think the biggest conversation I've had wasn't even around cancer. It's been about weight loss, because that is one of the toughest situations that we're having to deal with, right? Obesity and diabetes and all those types of chronic illnesses. And I sat down with my residents a couple of months ago and said, "How are you doing with those conversations?" And they said, "Not very well." And I said, "So what are you going to do differently?" And they said, "I don't know." Because having the conversation with your patient about, well, you need to make some behavioral changes, and they go, "Yeah, okay," and then they don't, how do you deal with that? So that's what my residents get to hear about from me a lot, which is these are the things that work. This is how my physician was a great partner. This is how you can be more patient-centered. And we talk about different tools that might work with their patients. So they get a front row seat to all my communication training. Some of it happens in the hallway.
The fact that you asked, how are those conversations going? I don't think I was ever asked that. It's more about how is that, more about the diagnosis and the treatment aspect of it. No one really asked a resident, how is those conversations going? So that's a good takeaway for anyone that's an educator that's listening to ask their residents.
The role that you're taking as someone who helps train residents in communications, I might be naive here, but I haven't heard that as a common requirement for somebody in your role. I almost like we talk to them about the tasks and the structures they do, but to me, it's almost like when people are working with you, yes, you get all the stuff that a GME director does, but you're sort of layering on this entire capability. It feels like a relatively unique flavor to your position. Is that fair?
I think so. Traditionally, the DIO has been a physician because you oversee programs that train physicians. It only makes sense. But when I was offered the opportunity to be the DIO, there were some additional strengths that I felt I could bring to the table. I think every DIO has their own strengths that they bring to the table. I know some DIOs who are not physicians either, and they have a real interest in faculty development, or they have a lot of experience in technology, or they have a lot of experience in informatics. And so I think any of us that are in these roles, that we like to bring kind of our own flavor to it. And there's not enough, in my opinion, enough communication faculty in medical schools. There's not enough communication faculty actually in the medical healthcare world. And considering many of our problems happen because of a communication breakdown, I'm not quite sure why we don't have the seat at the table that we should have. But, there's pros and cons to having a non-physician as a DIO. But if I need a physician to help me reach a goal or get something, I drag one of my physicians along with me. And if they need me, they drag me along. So it works well.
That is really, really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I want to pivot now into something that you wrote to us, which I thought was fascinating. And the timing was just beautiful. We're heading up on match day. And so the other week, Tosh was showing me inside the Medtrics platform. And I'm like, show me what happens inside it when you switch from somebody from UME to GME. And like a typical technical person, and a friend of mine, Tosh, is like, well, it's real simple. We click this and they were this and now they're that. So obviously on paper, going from UME to GME, a couple clicks of the button. But it's interesting to me because, Gretchen, you shared with me a line, well, there's actually little synergy between UME and GME, which results in unprepared and frustrated residents. And I read that from you and I'm like, well, that's entropy, right? That's energy that's being lost in the transition. We have these undergraduates and they're ready to become residents and we've lost something. And so to me, it was fascinating to look inside the Medtrics platform and it's click, click, click. And then to hear from somebody like you saying, well, it's a lot more complex than that. You've got a front row seat to this. So talk to me about that. What's going on?
Oh, there are so many things going on and not going on that should be going on. There are so many moving parts, right? So we have all of these amazing and smart and driven medical students who are about to graduate. So they start doing all of their interviewing and trying to figure out what specialty they want to join in the future, and then where do they want to do residency? Where do they think they can get into residency? And just from that perspective, it's very complicated. But what happens, we're always excited about match day, right? Everybody's put a lot of effort and energy into interviewing. You're trying to identify the best fit candidates to even interview, which is even more difficult than it sounds like because there are so many candidates and so few slots for residency, right? So right there we have a problem. So even if you've gone to medical school, there's no guarantee you're going to get a residency slot. And that is sad, right? If you complete medical school, you should be able to have an opportunity to practice medicine. But that's not how it works because of supply and demand. So right there, we have a problem. The other problem is that if you apply to a residency program, your application may or may not be read. So some programs get 5,000 applications for 10 slots. You're not going to sit and read 5,000 applications. So you have to, however you do it, and this is part of the inconsistency because every program can decide which criteria they want to put in play to decide who they want to potentially interview. There's a lot of inconsistency. I don't see a lot of best practices. And the other problem, I just read this morning that the average number of applications that each medical student submits from like a United States medical school, 72. They have applied to 72 programs. So you take all of the thousands and thousands and thousands of medical students who are getting ready to graduate, and on average, they're submitting applications to 72 programs, which is flooding all of the applications. And there's no way to review all that. So then you pick your criteria. Maybe they don't review anybody's application if they've been out of medical school more than a year. Maybe it's 5 years. Maybe they have to be from the area. Maybe they have to get a certain score. So those are all the things that go into it. But one of the biggest challenges that we've had is COVID. When COVID hit, it destroyed undergraduate medical education because many of their rotations in hospitals were stopped. They were pivoting and they did a brilliant job. Medical schools really undertook a very difficult task and they pivoted to online. But that means and we've seen it, residents start and they haven't touched a patient because everything they've done has been online. And that's part of the problem. So everybody comes, you get all your residents, and then some of them are really adept at their clinical skills and are where they're supposed to be. And others don't know how to take a blood pressure because I remember I went and saw my doctor, and there was a medical student in there, and he was trying to figure out how to take my blood pressure without touching me. He was so scared. And I'm like, relax, just breathe. It's okay, right? So that transition, under the best of circumstances, if everybody was at the same skill level, is hard. But when people are coming in from multiple skill levels, it's even more difficult.
I recently had a conversation with a dean of a medical school, but her perspective is they're having a lot of challenges on the medical school side where it's more of a generational challenge than COVID related. For example, they had students that are getting overwhelmed with the type of material that's covered in class, and they're needing additional support because of that. And then there's also attendance challenges because everybody is kind of just used to being at home now, and it's very hard to get them back into those classroom environment and getting those collaborative things going. Part of that may be due to the COVID situation, but I think there's also a component of everybody's used to that behind the screen life now, and I think that's it. So, do you see any of that generational challenges happening in GME, and from especially the newer residents that are coming in, and how that, especially the dynamic with the faculty?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, and she's right, and everything that they see in medical school, we see in residency. When you leave, and I'm sure you remember this, but when you leave medical school, one day you're a medical student, the next day you're a doctor, and the next day you're a resident doctor. It happens very, very quickly with very little time in between any of those things. But the amount of medical and clinical information that you are required to learn as a resident is exponentially more than it was as a medical student. And that's very difficult to help anybody prepare for that, for sure. No question about it. That's always been a challenge. Are there generational challenges? Absolutely. Providing feedback is not easy, because where if somebody in the past decided to give me feedback, they'd just be very blunt and say, this is what I need you to do. This is where you messed up. You got to do it this way. And I feel bad for a minute and I go about my business. Now you have to be very gentle. And there's nothing wrong with being gentle. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. If we can be more humanistic in how we talk to each other, I don't see an argument against that. But it is difficult because the expectations of the newer generation of what's supposed to happen in the workplace and where the emphasis should be and the priorities should be are very different from those of us who are running these workplaces and these environments. So we spend a lot of time, and I know DIOs everywhere and PDs, program directors, are doing the same thing. They are working really hard on communicating expectations from our side and listening to expectations from their side, which is a whole shift, because anybody who's been a physician will tell you, nobody ever asked me what I wanted to do as a physician. Well, that wasn't an option, but it is now. We have to be more open and we have to listen, and we've got to find our place where we can all move forward and still graduate really strong, independent physicians, which is what our goal is. That's what we're tasked with. So yes, the same things that the deans are struggling with, we are in residency as well.
You have on one side the trainees, and the other side you have the faculty, and you had to sort of bring them both together because one is very different than the other one in how they train.
Yes.
And say you have to speak the same language and speak that language in a more empathetic and humanistic way.
And what everybody says is it's a more kinder, gentler residency. They're limited to 80 hours a week. There never used to be a limit to the hours, so that you could You could have to work 36 straight hours. You could work insane hours. You don't do that anymore. Of course, the evidence showed a lot of medical mistakes, and there were a lot of problems with that model. But when they switched to 80 hours, other problems showed up, like continuity of care issues, not being able to follow critical patients for as long as you used to be able to in the past. So there's always gains and losses anytime you shift the model. But my biggest challenge always has been that I don't think the leaders of GME talk to the leaders of UME as much as we should. I just don't think we do. It's kind of treated as UME is this and GME is this, and never the two shall talk. I don't know.
Well, the big aha for me was that this topic of the transition from UME to GME, because at the end of the day, nobody owns that transition, right? There is UME and then there is GME, and you're not working from a shared understanding of what you want the residents to look like when they get there. There was a report that came out in 2021 by the Coalition for Physician Accountability's Undergraduate Medical Education, and that committee suggested, it was a 276-page report all about this topic, the transition of UME to GME. And one of the things that they suggested was a national ongoing committee that sort of owns, here's what transition should look like. What are your thoughts on that? Is that a good idea? Is it something that needs to be done at the national level? What are your thoughts on that?
I think consistency is always a good idea. I think best practices is always a good idea. Anytime, especially for new programs, and there are new programs starting all the time who don't have the best practices, they don't have the experience. So anytime you can at least get some guidance would be incredibly helpful, I think. Do I think somebody has to own that? I don't know if it needs to happen from a national level, but I do think that the UME and GME leadership need to come together, especially every hospital is affiliated with a medical school. And I think you should at least have some conversations about how are we going to do this handoff? And while we have residents from all over the world, I mean, you can't have that conversation with every medical school, but I think it would be a very productive conversation to say, tell you what, here's what we would like to give you to talk to the graduates and to help them prepare. Sometimes people do a boot camp. That can be helpful as well. But it's like we're running this relay race and there is no designated space to hand off the baton.
The great analogy.
It's just you get to the space and then you drop the baton, and then there's this space in between where people struggle, and which is not fair to the residents, by the way. They're going through things like trying to figure out how to move. They're managing a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of financial problems. They have no time for this transition. They suffer from imposter syndrome. They have, all these different levels of clinical training. Now they got to find a house. They got to find an apartment. They have to make all these arrangements. And on top of all of this, they've got to be there by mid-June so they can start orientation.
It's tremendously stressful, and the report calls out that stress. Now, I think it's easy for somebody like myself looking at it and saying, wow, residency probably is going to be hard. It is going to be stressful. The piece that I wanted to ask you about that was surprising to me is the report also mentions the stress on program directors like yourself during this process. Help us understand, what are some of the key stressors from your seat from poor transition?
There's a lot of stress on program directors, partly because they feel such a huge sense of ownership of their residencies, and it's their name on the on the application, and they want to do an outstanding job. They want to make sure that the residents are trained well, that they're taken care of, that their well-being is taken with great care. Resident suicide is on the rise. Physician suicide on the rise. We're very mindful of the challenges that residents experience when they're moving into residency. Program directors are trying to help people become really good doctors, provide the right resources, provide the right clinical training, work with all of the preceptors to make sure that, from a faculty development standpoint, that they know how to teach, that they are effective at it, that they know how to evaluate, that they are doing that from a similar mindset, that they are filling out all of the forms, that everybody understands what the milestones are, that they understand what the competencies mean. It's a hard job because if a resident struggles, a lot of program directors, they own that. Man, that's hard when residents struggle, and it's horrible when you don't renew their contract. So there's a lot of ownership. Plus, they have to keep up with all the requirements. They have to make sure that they are meeting all of the requirements from the ACGME, from the professional organization. And that ultimately everybody's prepared and ready to pass their boards. It's a lot to juggle, a lot.
It's almost like a parent-child relationship within a resident and a residency director, because by the end of your 3 or 5 years, you're pretty much like that's your person that's going to be taking care of you, and that directors also feels like they have that responsibility to make sure that individual is successful in their life.
That is absolutely what happens, and plus, we're not only dealing with the clinical aspect, the professional aspect, the communication aspect, all of those things, but we're trying to help them learn how to be good colleagues, how to become a part of the community, how to be physician leaders, how to understand what happens when you transition again from residency to independent practice. What does that look like? Are we preparing our residents for independent practice? Well, we're not doing as good a job of that as we could, right? So now we talk to them about how to read a contract, what things are important, how to make a decision about whether you want to go into the hospital or you want to go into private practice or you want to do the clinic side. What are my options? What should it look like? What about student loans? What about financial responsibilities? We're bringing all of those things into residency to make sure that they understand what are quality metrics. What are you going to be evaluated on when you leave and get your first job as a physician? So if it was just about teaching the clinical part, that might be a little easier, but there are dozens of different things that we have to make sure we cover.
The question for you, this also came up in the report, that what the report suggests is optimizing the application, interview, and selection process of residents, which is a huge part of your job. And it's one of those things that, if we make that easier, your life would be a lot easier. And I'm super curious about, we always talk about, how do organizations thrive? They thrive through people, processes, and platform. And so the Medtrics platform is a way to manage application, interview, and selection. But Tosh and I talk about this all the time. It's going to be a replication of your process. So when you look at the process of application, interview, selection, what innovations do you think could make the process part of that more efficient or equitable for directors like yourself?
There's been a lot of work in this area. One of the things that ACGM as a whole, NRMP, and all of the partners that are involved in GME are trying to do is make it a very fair and equitable process, right? Of some of the steps, the exams that medical students have to take to get into residency, many of them are pass-fail now instead of just being score-based, right? And so they're trying to take away some of those metrics that favored one group over another group. And so now you can't just look at scores and go, I'm only going to take residents who are at this score or above, because that really does leave out a significant number of really, really good medical students who are going to be outstanding physicians, right? On one hand, we're trying to make it easier because of the sheer number of applications that we get. What I would like to see, and this is where the conversation has been, that they're trying to make it so that we do get to see what each applicant brings to the table, what makes them uniquely them, so that we can evaluate it based on not just scores, not just geography and all those really easy metrics to evaluate them on, but really take a look at things like their personal statements, their evaluations, their clinical evaluations from their medical school rotations. But a lot of that is really time consuming. So, I would like to see limits on the number of applications that medical students can submit, partly because nobody can read all of those, and it really is clogging the system. I think that there has to be more transparency in the process. I think we should be able to articulate what our criteria are, what we are looking for, because if you are a rural program, you have different perspectives on what type of resident you're looking for, right?
Right.
But a lot of the hospitals who have residency programs, they're looking for physicians who, once they finish, will consider sticking around. They're trying to solve their own physician shortage issue, right? So I think if we could cap the number of applications, plus it's expensive. Man, these medical students are paying so much money. And on top of that, it costs a lot of money to apply to all those types of programs. So some capping, more transparency about how decisions are made. I think that would go a really long way in helping residents find the right fit, because two things are happening at the same time. Residents are trying to find a program that fits for them, right? And programs are trying to find residents who fit for them. And when you're limited by a 20-minute interview or very limited information in an application, it's almost impossible to really know, to get a feel for a resident. I would like to see more qualitative information made available, and then have the technology, and we have used some that helps do a bit of a qualitative analysis of that to help guide our decision making. But the way we're doing it is not as transparent as it needs to be, for sure.
What I really liked about your answer there is you mentioned tactics to be used on the UME and GME side, because this challenge doesn't get fixed by either side; it gets fixed by both. Tosh, you had something to add?
Yeah, what that made me think of is how I got into residency. Because when I was applying, I went through the same I actually didn't know if I wanted to do emergency medicine or radiology. So I applied to both, which means double the number of applications. And like every other student, I blasted out applications to all the Northeast programs for both specialties. And then it's, initially I was waiting for the applications, and what I really want, I always been passionate about technology, and I worked for a software company before, and I was always interested in software design. So I had all these apps that I had designed and mocked up on my computer. And what I did was I turned that into a PDF, and I sent it out to a bunch of program directors that I really was interested in as a PDF, and I explained how I was interested in that program. And one of the program directors, radiology residency director at Geisinger Health System, and I got called in for the interview, and she told me during the interview the reason that she asked me to be it. The reason that she called me in was because of that PDF, because Geisinger is a very tech-oriented health system and wanted to attract candidates that are interested in technology and being innovative. And that kind of made me stand out from the other applicants. What are your thoughts on, having some sort of component like that in giving students a flexibility to include something else that is, not standardized in the application?
Yeah. I like the idea, actually. Now, the challenge becomes how to manage that, because there's just by sheer numbers, because somebody has to accept the information and look at it and then get it to the committee who's going to make the decision on whether they want to invite you for an interview. I don't know if we need something that allows for that specific thing, but I do think I would like to see the personal statements to include things like that, right? Because what I read personal statements and a lot of them sound very much alike. I got to admit, right? They're all looking online how to write a really good personal statement to get a residency slot. And you read them, and after a while, you're like, I don't even know who this belongs to, because I've read 27 of these. I wish that the medical students would do that within their personal statements and say this and be more honest, because what I think is happening is that they're really trying to get the interview based on what they think program director or whomever wants to see from them. So they're trying to hit all the buzzwords. They're trying to hit all of the language that they've been told to put in there, and they're trying to do all of that. And I love seeing personal statements that are personal, that are individualistic. If you're really into sports and sports medicine, please don't leave that out. We need to know that. Because if we don't have a robust sports medicine rotation, you're going to be miserable. So they're just so generic. If somebody wrote a letter that said, here's what I'm really into healthcare and technology, and here's how, and this is what, really gets me up in the morning, and I love this, and how this is how I could apply it, I think that would get a lot of attention. I really do. I wish we could see more of their personalities instead of them trying to guess at what we're looking for. I would just tell them, please be yourself. And it would be so refreshing.
Great advice.
Tremendous advice, and thank you for that. And I know our UME audience, as well as the med student license our audience will appreciate that. We always say in marketing, the best marketing divides the room, right? And that's exactly what you're talking about, is by trying to say, here's where I would not be the best fit, here's where I'd be absolutely, positively the best fit. Whoa, that was incredible. That was so much fun.
It really was.
Gretchen, you have shared so much with us today, so many great tips. And when Tosh and I were relaunching MedEdge, we said, we really want to have as many DIOs on this program as we can. Your perspective has been incredible. The work that you do, the explanation of how you're crossing generations, teaching communication, it's just wow. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us today. If people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to do that?
Actually, the easiest way is to go to my website, GretchenHolmesPhD.com, and there is a place that you can send me an email, and I would love to hear from you. My podcast information is on there as well, and my upcoming book information and any of that stuff. But you can send me an email about GME stuff too. I will respond. And I got to say, gentlemen, this has just been one of the most fun conversations I've had in a long time about GME and UME. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Yeah, let's face it, folks. Some transformations, they're simpler than others, right? A caterpillar spins a cocoon, emerges as a fully developed butterfly. Looks easy, but what you're seeing is a transformational process that's evolved through millions of generations. Well, we don't have that luxury when it comes to medical education, not when we need more healthcare providers than ever today, and we want them to have fulfilling careers so they continue to inspire the next generation to come along. We can't wait for evolution to simplify this. We need to actually work together ourselves. It's UME, it's GME, it's the students, and even technology partners like Medtrics. We all need to be part of helping people bridge that gap from UME to GME and onward to their career path. Part of that mission involves that critical transition from UME to GME. Today's guest has been Dr. Gretchen Holmes, an ACGME Designated Institutional Official, DIO and Director at a healthcare system in the Southeast. You've been enjoying MedEdge, which is a production brought to you by the folks at Medtrics. Medtrics, practice medicine, not software. Learn more at medtricslab.com. For Santosh Cherian and everyone else on the MedEdge team, I'm Marcus Grimm.